Hi, we're Auction Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions. Hello, Rob.
Hey, Rich.
Welcome to the Shoe Room.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you tell people out there who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Rob Gardner. I'm now the CEO and co-founder of Rebalance Earth, and we've got one big idea. We think nature is the most valuable asset class on the planet, full stop. But before that, I mean, this is my third entrepreneurial outing, so I really come from the pensions and insurance world, and my kind of guiding North Star has always been financial freedom in a world worth living in. And for the last 25 years, everything I've done has really been about financial freedom, helping people be better with money. And really 2 years ago, I decided to focus much more on a world worth living in.
I think we can all agree that that's the most important thing. You have the most fascinating career. Take me through that contents page, Rob. Take me back from childhood to education through to getting us here, and don't skip through because it's amazing. I want the listeners to hear it.
Yeah, so actually my parents are both teachers, and I was born in Holland, and I suppose the important link there is I was born below sea level. And so even as a toddler, I was kind of aware of sea level rising. And this is back in 1978. So this is a long time ago. And Holland has always been up there on thinking more about the environment, everything from recycling and double, triple glazing. So even from a very young age, I was kind of acutely aware of this kind of idea that sea levels might rise, and that's not going to be a good thing. And then my parents taught all over. And in the 80s, we moved to Argentina. Now, people may or may not know this, but in 82, there was a war between the UK and Argentina. So being a British family and moving to Argentina in 1985 wasn't the most obvious move to do with your family. And, you know, there was...
Why they made that choice?
My mum and dad love to travel, and they've worked in some amazing countries all over the world. They were looking through the Times Educational Supplement, saw this job at St. Andrew's Scott School, Buenos Aires, and thought, right, well, our entire family over to Buenos Aires. And look, Buenos Aires in the 80s was dangerous. It was like Johannesburg. At school, I'd say someone in my class's parents or family would be murdered at least once a year. And the big thing, unfortunately, Argentina is the most incredible country from a landscape and a geography perspective, but it's probably one of the saddest stories of the last 100 years, because back in the early 20th century, it was an incredibly successful economy. And politically, it's had so much carnage from the 1980s. And, more recently now, we've got a new premier who's an interesting chap, so to say. But, we experienced devaluation, inflation. Inflation was running at 30% a month. And my experience of school was at the end of each month, we'd go out and we'd get our haircut, we'd buy new clothes. You'd go to the supermarket, and this was the days when you put price stickers on, and we do supermarket sweep. And the idea was to get around the supermarket as quickly as possible and grab stuff. You could buy milk at the morning's price rather than the afternoon's price. You just paid the morning's price. So this was my experience. And then at night, we would drive up to this house, which looked like a house out of Narcos, big metal bars, Dobermans. We'd all sit in the car. My dad would go into this house with a wad of Australs or pesos or whatever the currency was at that point in time, and then walk out with a much smaller wad of US dollars. We then come back home and we roll those US dollars up and put them in the old 35mm canisters. Some of your employees will have no idea what I'm talking about. But the old, you remember 35mm, and then we'd hide them around the house. And that's because putting your money in the bank was not the safest place to be. This all links to my passion for financial freedom and teaching people about money, because I just saw how hard my mum and dad worked. But actually there in Argentina, it was inflation could just take your money away. And if you didn't do that, can you imagine if at the end of the month he had 30% less money because of inflation? Just compounding away. My dad's salary couldn't buy one stamp 4 years later. So that is how bad inflation was. And I just kind of grew up in this world. And in Argentina, you only had 2 terms. So you just had this 3-month-long summer holiday. And we would go traveling all over South America. So we'd go down to Ushuaia. I remember going and we were in Patagonia, and David Attenborough was there and filming The Trials of Life, the first one in the 1990s. I did the Inca Trail when I was like 8 years old. Peru was a dangerous place at that time. There's El Sendero Luminoso, which was kind of like this shining path. There was nothing like the Peru that anyone who would go today. And I knew every currency's exchange rate to the US dollar at age 8. And the link there is my first job was in finance at Deutsche Bank. And I've always had a love for currencies and money, and had just a really intuitive sense of how much work do I need to do that, and what can that buy me in this currency. And just whilst we're still on the Argentina point, Argentina has a lot of very poor people, no middle class, and then just a handful of like super wealthy. And so really the school we were at was the school for expats or the super wealthy. And we were this kind of non-existent middle class. We were nothing like the rest of the kids. We were nothing like the 99% of Argentinians. And so I used to watch the older boys and girls, and they'd have their Coca-Cola and Fanta bottles, and they'd just leave it. But you just collect up the old bottles and then go and take it, and then you get money. So from a very young age, I used to get money, and I've got a book. Actually, I've got a copy which I'll give you afterwards. But my kind of catchphrase is earn it, keep it, and grow it. And so from Argentina, I learned two things: earn it. My parents work hard, and that's a really important value for me. But actually, I could see there's opportunities everywhere. There's Coca-Cola bottles, Fanta bottles.
That was a circular economy back then.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I mean, I'm a big fan of. M&S are about to reintroduce that, which is a great thing. But one of the things I try and tell people is there's opportunities to earn money everywhere. The number of eBay millionaires that sprung up during lockdown is amazing. But the second thing is the art of keeping hold of your money. In the case of Argentina, it was inflation, and the inflation we've experienced in the UK over the last 18 months is nothing like the inflation that we had there. Then I came back.
Wait, just before we leave Argentina, really interesting. So you saw that disparity between people that were struggling financially to get by and the uber wealthy. I think it's interesting. Some people see the uber wealthy and they project hatred and anger towards them and think, well, that's totally unfair. I can never be there. What was it about you that kind of, if I'm hearing it right, didn't find that inspirational, nor did you find it problematic? You just looked to find opportunity in that?
Yeah, it's funny. Although I did come back, and my parents taught at a very posh prep school here in the UK, where I did feel a little bit more like Downton Abbey, and I felt a little bit more like I was definitely the downstairs.
Right. Okay.
Whereas I was never made to feel like that. I think I was an interesting alien. This English boy in Argentina. So in a way, that made it quite unique. It classless, if that makes sense. So you're right. It had neither a positive or a negative impact on me. When I was a little bit older and back here in the UK, and I had more of that upstairs downstairs feeling, I did have a bit, for a long time in the beginning of my career, a chip on my shoulder. I'm like, I'm going to prove you, I'm going to go and earn money. And my tennis racket would be from the second hand. I had high tech trainers or Green Flash, and so I had that chip on my shoulder that I wasn't like the other kids.
It's a chip I carry at
the school. So it took me a long time to get rid of that chip, and that definitely motivated me in the first 5 years of my career.
I think the chip's way more healthy than the resentment is. So some people see that disparity and go, I can never get there, that's terrible. Others see it and think, what can I do? Where is my opportunity? As we move through, I think the entrepreneurial bit's going to be a key theme for your career, but you could already see that at 8 years old, right? The way you were looking for opportunities and things. And when I look back now, it's not quite as aligned to the financial world, but even when I was washing pots in a hotel kitchen, I was always trying to stack it in the most efficient way to make it clean. There was no benefit to doing it better or perform, but my brain just couldn't not give me a way of how can I improve this process and system and try and make it better.
Well, on the entrepreneurial thing, you just reminded me. So my parents moved back to the UK, and then they taught in Saudi and all over the Middle East. And at that point, once you were over the age of 13, you couldn't go to school in the Middle East. And this is after the first Gulf War. So
they picked their times to move.
Yeah, no, they did. No, they weren't there during the first Gulf War, but they moved basically very shortly afterwards. and I went to school in Bristol. But I used to, so in Saudi you couldn't drink, but everyone used to brew their own alcohol. So I got all the recipes for what's called Jeddah gin, and then I convinced the kitchen staff at my school to brew this stuff for me in the old, if you remember at school, like the big things of squash, like industrial canisters of squash. I used to then get them to brew it for me and then stick it up in the pipes. And then
you persuade
I know, I don't know how, because I mean that's such a sackable offence. I mean basically they were taking, I wasn't paying them, I didn't pay them, and and they could have lost their jobs. And then I used to go to Sainsbury's, buy Cresta lemonade, and then cut it and sell it. And the other thing I used to do was buy fags at Saudi, because you could buy like at the time I think fags were like £2.50 in the UK, and you could buy Marlboro Light, Marlboro for 20p, 40p. So I used to like go and visit my mum and dad in Saudi and then come back with a caseload of Camel cigarettes and Marlboro and then sell it. And then I would use that to fund my going out, my distillery, my Jeddah gin. From my whole life, I've always had this kind of itch to kind of make money, but not in really just to kind of enable me to do the things I want to do. That was just a really fun being able to go out with my mates and go to the pub or buy clothes.
But it sounds like then it was the solving the problem and the creative bit even more so than the tokens of purchase it gave you.
Big time. And obviously with it there was a bit of kudos to that as well. It wasn't about generating the money. You're right. I did definitely enjoy kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to? It felt a bit Roald Dahl-esque. How am I going to convince these people to allow me to brew the booze, and then how am I going to get it out?
Love it. Okay, so keep moving us forward through education.
So, about to do maths, physics, chemistry, because that's what my mum and dad both did. And
were you interested in those, or it's just what you were supposed to do?
I was good at maths.
Yeah.
I was good at physics. I didn't particularly enjoy them. My mum and dad, it's just kind of, that's what my parents did. That's what I was good at. But by that age, I think I'd visited like 35 different countries. I traveled to most countries in South America. Loved glaciers. That's my kind of the thing I really, really love. And the geography teacher convinced me to do geography, and I ended up taking geography and then dropping chemistry. And then he then convinced me to apply to do geography at university. And I still remember him now, Tim Clements, and he said, and Mrs. Lawrence are saying, you just got to pick a subject you love. Don't worry about, you had the careers. I don't know if you remember those kind of like careers tests. You take it and tell you could be an accountant or an actuary, and you're like,
I just wanted to be a lawyer. So I just answered it so that it'd say lawyer. I just cheat the system so it gives you the answer you want. Then I realised I didn't actually want to be a lawyer. I was just really into Ally McBeal, the TV programme that was on when I was a teenager.
Yeah, Ally McBeal. Well, so studied geography and really that
whereabouts?
At Oxford. Very lucky because then within that you can then specialise into human and physical, and the bit that I enjoyed the most was really hydrology and glaciology, and then I became part of the Alpine Glacier Project, which has been going for 50 years, and students from various universities around the UK would go out to Switzerland and then drill boreholes, sediment data, the full works, and just all of the joy of being on a field trip, camping, having to play rock, paper, scissors, decide who's going to walk 2 hours down the mountain to go to the supermarket and buy the food and the beer to walk back up, and then who's going to go up and collect the data from the weather station. So that was an incredible experience. And the other thing about Oxford is that you just have an incredible milk round. And I'd never heard of investment banks. I'd heard of HSBC and Barclays, but I never heard of Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch. And so I used to famously, amongst all my friends, I'd have the careers chart. I did the opposite of you. I knew I definitely didn't want to be a lawyer. So I'd go to all the lawyers' events because I knew that I didn't want that job, and basically just go for all the free food and the booze. The best were always Unilever and Procter & Gamble, because you'd then walk away with like shampoo, washing up liquid, ice cream, like the full work.
Where's the opportunity?
Exactly. Where's the opportunity? And then ended up doing an internship with Deutsche Bank, and then ended up joining the graduate program and started my career.
What was that internship like? Was that full-on ferocious type of?
Yeah. I mean,
talk about that culture.
It's funny actually, and I've been reflecting on it because in the world that we live in today, which is kind of like full-on ESG, quite woke. This was definitely, would fail on a number of areas, and it was at the end of the 90s. Deutsche Bank at the time had just bought Bankers Trust, Deutsche Morgan Grenfell, and it was this kind of European continental bank which wanted to be the number one. And when I joined, it became number one in FX globally. It knocked off Citi and UBS, and just had huge ambition. And I always remember one of my bosses, Martin Belvisi, he said, "Rich, at Deutsche Bank, we're part Doberman, part piranha." And he had like a dried piranha on the top of his desk. So this is, by the way, you can actually see his piranha on the top of his desk in the 2000 graduate recruitment video. So he lives his, so part Doberman, part piranha. And I remember in the 2001 census, I was living with two of my mates who I'd studied geography with. One was working for EY and one was working for Pricewaterhouse. I was doing 100 hours a week. I was doing more than the two of them put together. I used to get in at 6:30 and I'd be there until like 9:30 at night. In fact, if you weren't at your desk at 9:30, my boss would call up and he'd be like, "Bobo, is that you, Bobo?" And I go, "Yeah, hey Pandol." He goes, "Where's Euro Swissy 6-month vol?" And if you didn't know it like that, you'd be like, "Bobo, you're lower than whale shit at the bottom of the ocean." That was always his. I mean, now it's funny, but when you're 22, when there's some big MD says you're lower than whale shit at the bottom of the ocean, you're like, okay, I know where I sit in the world. At the end of the year, give me a big fat bonus, and then topped it up with everything else. He was tough on his people, but whenever the big boss came back, he'd always be like, Andrew, come over, meet Rob. He's so very strange, but in some ways I kind of miss that. It was a meritocracy. So I was 22. It didn't matter if you were 22, 32, or 42. If you were doing a job better than the next person, then you were. So at like 24, I remember I had some guy who ended up working for me at 24, and he was just, you can imagine, he had all the MBAs, and I think you and I probably feel the same way about MBAs, moderate but average. But yeah, I forgot you. Well, you didn't do an MBA, so you're okay.
James is behind the camera, and there's a famous story if you listen to James's podcast about how he went back to do a master's, and I shouted out on a podcast I did that he should have just watched YouTube instead. But that's by the by.
So, but yeah, that's what I loved about it, and I learned so much.
I'm so envious of that experience in some way. So I didn't have that. Mine, my exposure to growing up, it was like, can't talk about money. It's not a thing. My parents were the exact opposite of yours by the sounds of it. Didn't want to leave the small town they were from, don't have ideas, don't have ambitions. Literally going into business was just, didn't even know it existed. Didn't even know banks existed really. So, but my version of that apprenticeship was in the sporting world. So whereas that sort of level of abuse was there, but physical as well. So that same immediate, it's not good enough feedback was, you're on your backside, get up. And bigger American guys playing American football, if you weren't training hard enough, no one had to tell you. You found out pretty damn fast. And I think that was so character building, and the amount of failing so much through sport earlier. And we toured America in 2006, and I was the shortest person in my position by a foot. I looked like the mascot when we went out so I was captain, so I went out to shake hands at the start. I looked like someone's little brother, the mascot. And the only reason they made me captain was because I outworked everyone else, because I had no choice. I was the worst athlete on the team. I had to outwork everybody else. And that was my version of the character building type of setup that you described, I think. But I think if we hadn't had that sort of incredibly challenging, demanding selection process, I wouldn't be where I am today. I don't know if you feel like you would.
Yeah, well, so I mean, this has got, well, you kind of reflect back and go, is this good or bad? Have we got, and I'm a huge fan of radical candor, and and I know you feel the same way, but not everyone likes radical candor. I mean, you got radical. I mean, at times it was definitely abusive and bullying.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a line. But I do believe, especially in the early part of your career, you want to work your butt off. The thing is, though, if you did work your butt off, you did get in the quiet moments in between. And James, you talk about, being able to listen into calls and all the rest. That's when you learn, and you earned the trust by getting everyone's coffees, by getting everyone's lunch, and not screwing it up. And you think it's you think it's a menial task. It is a bit hazing. But actually, they're saying, can you pay attention to detail? Can you not fuck it up? Do we know that you're going to get this thing right? The quid pro quo is when it's a little bit dark, a little bit quiet on the desk. They're going to sit down and they're going to tell you, well, this is why we did this, or this is how we did that, and you build, you build that trust. And the other thing is, you don't realize it, but 25 years later, these people are all, some of these people that I used to work with can potentially now help me out in my new world and my new ventures. And that's one of the things I think when you start your career, you cannot imagine that you're going to be working with someone who that relationship, you might be valuable to them or vice versa 20 years.
And you don't know the lesson you're learning at the time. So I remember, I worked on building sites and in oil refineries and steel works, and I once spent an entire summer scraping oil off railway lines at steelworks on my hands and knees for like 6 weeks straight, and this was during university, and it was horrific. But I think now it's why I have the ability to speak politely to a very manual workforce, and also can go into a boardroom, which at various points in my career has been really useful. You don't realize you're learning those lessons at the time, and I find it now, I'm like, oh God, that thing I was doing then I'm applying now. So for young people out there, make the tea, make the coffee, don't be bullied or abused. But if you get asked to do something hard, just do it with a smile and take the opportunity in it. And to complete that loop, so James is sat in the room, and James was the person who would benefit the most from spending some time with you and learning about your career. So we asked James to help you with your travel arrangements. Yeah, it wasn't an accident. He earned the right to get that. So yeah, compete.
Well, he would have liked, so Excel, having geography, I was probably the only geographer who got into finance, and it was like quite saluting. Most people were LSE, finance, economics. Yeah. Like, what on earth is a geographer doing here? I didn't know anything about finance or bootstrapping or yield curves or Excel. But basically, if you ever use the mouse when you're using Excel, you thought, it's like, no. Like you had to like play Excel like it was a piano and know all. I mean, I was just listening to you. I was thinking, there's Jay, you talk about loving Excel, and you would have loved it. I hated it. I didn't know anything about Excel. Everyone else had all done Excel as part of their finance course, and I had to teach myself. But yeah, if you were ever caught using the mouse because you didn't know the shortcuts, that was just a massive fine or a abuse for doing that. So that's always an extra incentive to learn.
For avoidance of doubt, no one beats James, to the best of my knowledge, for using a mouse. Does Chris beat you for that?
No, it's on my objectives.
Okay. But you do learn. The thing is, though, that the upside was there. I mean, I've been reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's book, Be Useful, which is superb, and I share so much of his kind of perspective about, basically work your ass off. Yeah. But he does make the point, though, there needs to be upside, and so it's not clear to me that when you were cleaning oil off the railway tracks, there was much upside. There was a lot of upside for me at Deutsche.
Interesting. The upside of that was, it was the only way. So I lived in North Lincolnshire, and the Humber Bridge used to have these really expensive bridge toll tickets to get across. And my now wife lived on the other side of the bridge. So it was literally an hour of scraping oil off a railway line allowed me to go see my now wife.
Oh, nice.
So that was the exchange rate mechanism then.
Well, a very valuable one.
Good investment. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, very good investment. So worked in finance. Then I got headhunted by my first business partner, Dawid, and that was pretty special because I went to go and work at Merrill Lynch, and that was my introduction to pensions. And
how did that approach? So headhunting, what does that look like for people?
I mean, in financial services, you have an entire industry of people who are literally called headhunters, whose job it is to call up people at other jobs elsewhere and say, "There's a job over here. Do you want to come and take that job?" It's an interesting world because on the one hand, if you're recruiting, it's a great way to get good talent. At the same time, if you have a team and you have talented people and someone gets headhunted away, it's a nightmare. And also, if you're a candidate, it's the headhunters really looking after themselves. It's a commission-based business. But yeah, there I was sort of like 24, 25, and getting calls from headhunters. It does make you feel a little bit it makes you feel very special. Actually, you realise
Pro business athlete, right?
yeah, exactly. Everyone gets those calls, but no, it was in 2003, and actually, it was just because I'd had a change of boss at Deutsche Bank, and actually, I had one of those kind of sliding door moments. I could have gone and worked in the oil and commodities trading, so I was considering becoming an oil trader. This was, I would say, in 2002.
I'm going to hold it against you.
Yeah, but I did briefly, seriously consider becoming an oil trader, or leaving and joining Merrill Lynch and working with Dawid and working on trying to help pension funds and obviously being sort of 24, 25, telling people you work in pensions isn't, it's not the most exciting dynamic intro. But no, I loved it, and I suppose it suited me. I'm a very long-term person. I like solving long-term complicated problems. And then in 2003, we pioneered a way of pension funds managing their risk. We completely changed the way pension funds not only think about their assets, which is what they really focused on, but also their liabilities to pay these pensioners for the next 100 years. It was 2003, and people who work in pensions tend to be kind of actuaries. So we were these two outsiders.
Can you explain to people what actuaries are?
Yeah.
Outside the
So an actuary is typically someone who's incredibly good at maths, insanely good at maths, and their job is normally to estimate when people will die. There are other things, likelihood of car crashes. So you have actuaries in the insurance industry and the pensions industry, and it's really the law of large numbers and how long people might live. And if people think about sort of like Scottish widows, the sort of pensions and insurance industry really came from kind of Scotland. But this idea that how can I insure 1,000 people's lives or 1 million people's lives, pull that together, and if someone dies early, then that money can be used to fund someone who lives a long time. So it goes back a long time pre sort of computer modeling. And in fact, the first company we founded, Reddington, is named after Frank Reddington, who is arguably the world's most famous actuary. So if you enter the geeky world of pensions investment, Frank Reddington is arguably the world's greatest actuary, the goat of actuaries. And we founded Reddington on what would have been his 100th birthday. And he was the chief actuary for Prudential in the 1950s and came up with all of these models. So we weren't actuaries. And we came in as outsiders and said, well, there has to be a better way to manage these assets and liabilities. And pension funds used to spend all of their time looking at their assets, how have they done, what's gone up, what's gone down, how should we change over the next 3 years? And then once every 3 years, they'd look at the liability side, which is how many members do we have to pay, how long might they all live, what cash flows do we use? And they weren't really managing the two against each other. And we kind of came in and said, well, that doesn't make any sense. You need to look at what makes your liabilities go up and down and what makes your assets go up and down, and can you make those mirror each other a little bit more? And obviously you want to make your assets grow faster than that. So that was kind of the approach that we came in, and I suppose our core idea was that you could actually use derivatives to manage this super long dated interest rate and inflation risk, but still remain invested in equities and bonds.
Can you explain to people what derivatives are?
Yeah, so normally we buy physical things, a house, or coffee, or petrol. A derivative is a contract. People gamble or bet. Effectively, that's a derivative where we can enter into a contract where we can say, I will buy your coffee beans off you at this price in the future. Now, obviously, if the price is higher, I've made money because I bought it at a price that we've already agreed and the price has gone up. But conversely, if the price falls, then you've made money. Now, derivatives are very helpful because if you're a producer, you can kind of lock in your costs, but also people use it to speculate as well. So derivatives are kind of an interesting idea. And what people outside of financial services won't know is if you took all of the stock of all of the physical things you buy and sell, bonds and equities, the derivatives market is way, way bigger. And that's probably the bit that people don't really understand about the kind of global financial crisis. And people sort of talk about shadow banking, that there are all these other financial instruments that kind of sit behind the scenes that are way bigger than the sort of physical things that people buy and sell. in this case, those derivatives were being used to manage risk. So pension funds were saying, well, I want to lock in that inflation risk because I don't know what inflation will be and how to pay that out. So we kind of changed the way pension funds think about and manage risk in 2003. And at the time, I became the youngest director ever at Merrill Lynch. And then literally in March 2006, I retired, age 27. And that's because it allowed me to keep my shares. And we set up Reddington. And
before you do that, what was it that allowed you to achieve that at that age? Was it technical ability? Was it your relationships within the business? How did you do that?
It's really an excellent question. So we had a team, and we had two people on the team who were super technical. I would say both Dawid and I are kind of Babel fish in that we could speak to business people and frame and contextualize the problem, and then we could go back to base and speak to incredibly smart people and understand about 50% of what they'd say, and have the confidence to say, I don't understand what you're saying, and sort of act as the sort of translation mechanism back. I think linked to that, my first boss, the one who used to describe me as no, the one who was like, you're lower than whale shit at the bottom of the ocean. In spring, I used to put out our best ideas. These were derivative ideas, so highly esoteric, but I used to do it as a fashion magazine. This guy was he was actually from Malta, but he was sort of more Italian, flamboyant gay guy. But in the early 2000s in investment banking, you didn't get many flamboyantly, openly gay men. And I used to put what was this quite boring collection of derivative ideas together, but I made it into like a fashion magazine. And I think the importance of framing it and making it accessible is a really key skill. And there were two books that Dawid and I read at the time that helped us make that move. And I'd recommend now. One is quite dated. First one was Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat. And he was basically talking about how everything had now changed. This was in the internet era, so pre-social media, but people could use blogs. People could now outsource accountancy to India. And so all of the conversations we're having now about AI was really about outsourcing and how you can use the internet to do things cheap around the world. But the world is flat, i.e. you can kind of get anything from anywhere at a much lower cost. And what does that do to sort of change the world? And so that kind of means, well, actually, I don't need to be part of a big Merrill Lynch to do things. And that's even more true today, right? I mean, what I can do with my iPhone and AI just blows my mind. And then the second one was The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's first book. And in it, he talks about people who, the tipping point is how do you create change? And he talks about these sort of three skill sets. One is a maven, someone who has deep technical expertise. Neither Dawid and I were mavens, although we did have mavens working for us. And we then hired those mavens to come and join us at Reddington. But there are people who have above average social connectivity. And the test is you get a yellow pages and you read through it and you just have to underline how many people you know with that name. And depending on how old you are, and as a function normally of race or background, you can sort of say, you'd expect to know that many people. But there were connectors who will just have like 5x that and 10x that. And I remember working in investment banking and I'd look around and the most successful people were never the ones who were the brightest or the smart. They were the ones who had the best relationships, as in either externally or internally. And then obviously linked with that is also kind of communication skills, you know, the ability to kind of frame something and make it accessible.
Persuade someone to make gin for you.
Persuade someone to make cheddar gin. It wasn't even gin. Yeah, I mean, it was god awful stuff, but yeah.
Turning up at the legal events at university when you just wanted a fee, but you would have had to have worked a room to do that. So those skills that allowed you to be the youngest director at Merrill Lynch, you were picking up at each of those different chapters along the way?
Yeah, no, 100%. And look, at the time I was sort of 27 and my clients were sort of 45 or 50. So trying to convince people to build that trust. And obviously you do need to be good. So that's why you do need to work hard. You need to know your subject matter expert. And I think you need to know an awful lot, but then you can still augment that with someone on your team who like really
Always hire people better than you.
knows the details. But yeah, basically Dowd and I were like, you know what, because we had to then go and convince the investment consultants that this was a better way of doing it, and there are all these barriers you could put up, and you're just greedy investment bankers, and and so we're like, you know what, let's turn up and show them how it's done. And so we founded Reddington. We literally founded it out of my spare bedroom in my flat. I was in North London at the time, and Dowd's attic. And even today in Reddington's office, there's a meeting room called Rob's Kitchen and Dowd's attic, in sort of remembrance of that. And a couple of our first staff were kind of hard into my kitchen. I probably had my washing drying on the side, and there'd be a laptop on the kitchen table. And that's how we started Reddington. Actually, our first client was the Royal Mail back in 2006, and I'm forever grateful to Frank Shanella, who was the financial director of Royal Mail at the time. And he could have hired Barclays or Ross, so he had like investment banks, or he could have hired PwC, Mercer, Aon Hewitt, and he hired us.
Did you ever ask him why?
Well, he said, because he saw that we had the skills that he could see in the investment bank, that from the Barclays and all the rest, we were as good as them. Because literally just a month earlier, we'd been at Merrill Lynch.
Yeah.
So we were kind of like first amongst equals with them, but suddenly we were in this kind of deconflicted. The problem with the banks is they're in a conflicted business model, and we're in this kind of deconflicted business model. And I'm guessing the thing about the work ethic of bankers, I mean, there are lots of sort of positives and negatives, but typically the work ethic is like super high. So he's kind of getting all of that, which is what he felt he needed, but without any of the negatives. And then he took our contract and he crossed out Reddington, and he wrote in Robert Gardner and Dawid Kanotia-Hulu, and he said, I've done you a favor. He says, your job is to make sure that your next client hires Reddington, not you guys, because I'm hiring you guys. And that's a really important lesson, because, we called the business Reddington after Frank Reddington, not Gardner, Kanotia-Hulu or PricewaterhouseCoopers, because A, Gardner, Kanotia-Hulu sounds very weird. But B, I think, you need to build a brand that lives beyond you, and you can hand over. And both Dowd and I are very much into kind of this idea of thinking 100 years, ancestors, and handing it on. And that taught me two lessons. A, build a team and get people to hire Reddington, so it wasn't hiring us. And then the second thing, as you start to build and grow your business, is you need to diversify your revenue. You can't have all your eggs in one basket. You can't have all. You can have an amazing contract, and many businesses get into trouble because they have an amazing client for a long, long time, and then one day that client goes, and that entire business can unravel. So yeah, I'm very grateful to Frank, A, for hiring us and sticking his neck out, B, for crossing out our contract, which then forced us to make two really good business decisions.
Nice. So take us to the you departing Reddington.
Yeah, so that was 2006. Built Reddington up. I mean, there were so many lessons learned, all the different phases, and I think you've probably read a book by Daniel Priestley, and I don't know if you remember the bit where he talks about crossing the desert, but have definitely sort of crossed the desert, and our goal was always to build a high performance team. We had a really nice boutique business. We could have stopped at about 12, 15, 18 people, had a really nice little boutique business. We were way more profitable then than a long time later.
Did you feel you were in a special time then when you had those? Were you sort of present enough to be like, this is nice and cool and I like it?
There was a sweet spot time. I think, unfortunately, it was very close to the global financial crisis. So, and at the time, our cash flow variability wasn't sorted. So a few years later, one of the best things we did is we moved to these kind of fixed term inflation-linked contracts. Because the big issue that we had was what I called the wall of death, which is I could forecast my revenues 3 months out. And then as we hired more people and we got bigger and bigger, our costs were going up. So I was let's say our costs were £500,000 a month, I could see 3 months out and it'd be like 800,000, 800,000, 800,000, and then it would drop to 100,000. So you've got a £400,000 shortfall. And people come to me and say, oh, hey, I've got engaged and I want to get out a mortgage. Just want to check, how's the business? Am I going to get my bonus at the end of the year? I'm thinking, I'm not sure we're going to even pay you at the end of the year. And nothing to do with their performance or all the rest, but just to do with the kind of the shape of the financial shape of the business. And so that the responsibility of paying people's wages and knowing that people are kind of making big life decisions, getting married, taking out mortgages, that was kind of a big weight to carry around my neck, especially, I was probably like 29 or 30 at the time. So I probably didn't enjoy it as much as I did. It wasn't until you got to the end of the year, you go, actually, that was an okay year. We did quite well. Because at every point in that year, you're just like...
It's like being in an ice bath. It's not nice until you get out.
Exactly. That's a good analogy. So that was that. But, fast forward, Reddington's now a big business, or a decent sized SME. We founded another business along the way, Mallow Street. And then about 5 years ago, we were looking, actually before that, we were looking to raise money in Reddington. And then again, the big question when we were letting private equity companies in was, can we invest in this business without you and Dawid in it? I.e., to what extent is the success of this business dependent on you two versus dependent on Reddington, the culture, the people? Prove to us that this business can make money without you in it. So ironically, at that point in time, the business was worth more with us out of it than in it, because there was basically a big discount because people were like, well, I don't know what the uncertainty is. So it was almost like we had to prove that, yeah, well, actually, no, we've got a great team. They can go and win business.
When you were first asked that question, what was your honest answer? Was your honest answer, well, no, it's not going to be as good without me in it? Or were you at the point then when you were like, actually, no, I can walk away?
Well, I think both are true. I mean, I would say this because it's kind of my baby, but you always think that, if it's you do it in a different way. What we had done is we had made it so it could run without us. That for sure we had. I always remember someone saying, you've not got the right team and systems in place if you can't go on holiday and turn your email and your laptop off, or your BlackBerry at the time. If you're still having to check your email and all the rest, then you haven't got the right system, culture, processes in place. And that was hard. And actually that was hard on my marriage in the early part of our marriage, in terms of like, how do you make that work? But by that point we had got it. But it's fair to say that on the selling side of the business, so on the running 100%, but on the selling side of the business, that was definitely probably mine and Dawid's strength.
Okay. So how did you demonstrate that it could run without you?
Well, I ended up stepping back. So I still own shares in Reddington.
Yeah.
It's still part of my, as I say, I'm still the co-founder and part owner of that business, but I ended up joining the executive board of St. James's Place. So at the same time, I was in this weird situation where I had all my money and wealth tied up in the value of Reddington, and I was paying myself out. So I was in this sort of catch-22. So I needed another job because I didn't have my financial security was wrapped up in this.
Yeah.
So I needed another job to go to. I couldn't just sort of like step back and go, okay, right, run its business.
Incredibly strange, yeah.
Yeah, and I just happened to get, again, sort of headhunted because the person who I replaced knew me and said, oh, by the way, confidentially, I'm going to be retiring, and we're looking for my successor, and we're running a process.
And had you worked closely with St. James's Place before?
Yeah, they were a client of Reddington. So Reddington had done some work.
It has featured a lot across shoot room sessions of people talking about those career changes and certainly having those existing relationships it's what you said before, the social connectivity, right? It's so important in business.
Yeah, and I mean, James said it on the podcast, but it kind of 75% of jobs you don't know about, or you might know about it and there might be a process, but there'll typically be sort of preferred candidates in that process.
Yeah.
As a result of that. So it all kind of in 2018 we'd had this feedback. By the way, when you go to private equity, you show your firm, your Reddington, which is your kind of baby, and obviously, like all parents, you think your baby's beautiful.
They tell you it's not right.
Yeah, I mean, you're a big fan of feedback. You get some pretty brutal, radical feedback about, yeah, your baby is beautiful, but, and that was hard to hear the first time. But again, you learn so much from, you become, and actually there's an interesting lesson in that, because I kind of think about Reddington, the founder, Reddington being the CEO, co-CEO, and now Reddington, the investor, and your roles in each one of those is different. But in the beginning, you're all three at once.
Yes.
So as I kind of gone through, you've sort of almost like untangled those.
When you've worn a lot more hats along the way. So my experience of founding OC with Auctioning House is, so we have 25 people now, say. I've done most of those jobs from day one, because it was me and Dan that started it. So we look at, when we buy a new estate, we produce an acquisition paper, and each time it gets better, because I would have written 9 out of the 10 sections, and each time we did a new acquisition, a professional, national leading expert in that field's come in. Suddenly that section's amazing. And the last one we looked at, I didn't write a solo section. I contributed to a vision statement, reviewed the piece, and it's night and day from where it was. So, I've done 20 roles, and now there's 25 people better than me doing those jobs. Yeah,
that's the great thing about a business. It compounds up, right? You compound up the intellectual capital and capability of the business. So like the surface area of what you can do as a business just... And that's what I think people in Reddington didn't understand. I was sharing with someone recently, it was in 2014, I'd done a vision and strategy piece, and I was saying by 2024, we'll be making 25 million a year, we'll be making £4 or £5 million profit. They looked at me like I was crazy. And then 10 years later, did it.
If people, when you talk about your goals, there was a quote, isn't there, that if people don't think you're crazy, they're not big enough.
Yeah.
So how many people are there now?
I'm at about 200. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, right? To have founded that and for it to be where it is now.
Yeah. And actually there's a business that's spun out in China called YYT that I'm now sit on the board on. So the guy who's the CEO of that business, he was the first person I hired, a guy called Stephen Yang Yu. And now he runs this like cool little, I say little business in China, basically does all the ALM software for some of the biggest insurance companies in China, which happen to be some of the biggest insurance companies in the world.
The beautiful thing there is the team are behind camera going, which one of us is going to spin out first? Like, and where, which is amazing. So talk briefly about your period with St James's Place. What was that like, from it being your business and your baby to being in someone else's world?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons, I mean, you talked about sport being where you kind of got that feedback. I thought, okay, I've built a business with my co-partner from the ground up. We'd set up an amazing culture in Reddington, very purpose-led. Our goal at Reddington is, how can we help make 100 million people financially secure? My whole kind of, everything that we've done has always been guided by a really long-term purpose. Way before purpose became this sort of thing that we must have. I was very lucky that my mentor was a guy called Mike Harris. Mike Harris convinced Midland Bank to set up First Direct, which was the first telephone bank. And then in 1998, he convinced Prudential to give him a load of money and set up Egg, which was the first internet bank. And so I've known him since 2012. In fact, I wrote a letter to him with a 100-year vision for Reddington to kind of get on his iconic mentoring course. It's still on my blog. But yeah, the first part of his mentoring was purpose beyond money. And he talks about a game worth playing, win, lose, or draw. And whether it's Reddington, Mallow Street, my charity Red Start, which is amazing. We're going to change the game for 4.7 million young primary school kids, because we're going to teach them about money and how it works, and help them make less stupid decisions about buy now, pay later, help them get more engaged with their pension and invest in your fund or my fund one day. That's really cool, but it starts with purpose, and and now with Rebalance Earth, and both Reddington and Mallow Street are B Corps. So I've got 2 B Corps under my belt, and the intention is that Rebalance Earth will become a B Corp. And we were talking about boards, but you should look into this. You can actually appoint nature to be on your board as well. So been speaking to some lawyers in Bristol about how can we actually appoint nature on our board. And I'm a big believer that, you know, you can have the biggest impact by being a profit-based business, because P&L, profit and loss, is a brutal discipline. It's like being tackled on the ground. As I was talking about that wall of death, that accountability, it is ruthless, it is relentless. But I think being purpose-led gives you that kind of that soul and character of a charity. So if you can kind of position yourself at that point, I think that's where you can have the biggest impact. So that was Reddington and Mallow Street. This opportunity came up at St James's Place. The reason why that was interesting, at the time they had about 750,000 clients and £100 billion. When I left, there was £150 billion. That's a big old number.
Breathtaking scale, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, people don't realise how big a billion is. Just to put it in context, you know, if you would count up to 1 million, it would sort of take you 12 days, but to count to 1 billion would take you 31 years. So £150 billion is an insane amount of money. And I was responsible for that on behalf of, by the end, almost 1 million clients, some of them who were like less than 1 year old and quite a few that were over 100 years old. So that opportunity, the opportunity to embed environmental, social governance to the world worth living in, incredibly powerful. At the time, I was the youngest FTSE 100 board director, so I was 39, so I was the youngest board director in the FTSE 100. I also had the opportunity to position myself potentially one day to be their CEO, and just learning what it is to be a listed business with annual results, with equity analysts. We have to meet with shareholders. It sort of, you know, it's a different level. I like to play tennis, but it's sort of like going from like club level tennis to
Suddenly Nadal.
to national. Well, probably not Nadal, but certainly national level before going up. I mean, obviously, if you're at the very, very top of, you know, if you're Apple or Microsoft, that's Nadal, Djokovic level. And so for me, it was the ultimate. That was my MBA. I was like, I've got nothing. It's a game worth playing, win, lose or draw.
Yeah.
Because actually, I went from being a consultant where I advised people on what to do, where I was there, the buck stopped with me. Obviously, I had a big team. I had 450 people working for me, so it wasn't that I was doing it. But anything went wrong, it was my name. And if anything did really go wrong, I could, you know, get arrested and go to prison. That's what SMCR under the FCA does. And, you know, if it was in the press, it was my name in the press. If you get trolled on the internet, it was my name being trolled. So, you know, you're the man in the arena, which is one of my favorite poems. You are the man in the arena. And yeah, people thought I was mad going there because it sort of didn't really think it was me, but the opportunity was amazing. And actually what I wanted to do is, could I recreate culture at scale? Could I take an existing culture and change it? It's a lot harder.
I'm really wondering, did you change the culture at St James's Place more or less than St James's Place changed you?
I think I would like to think I changed it more than it changed me. I don't think my culture or who I am has changed much. I definitely learned a lot of skills and experience that I would never have had if I'd stayed at Reddington. But that's probably not changed me. It's just given me more skills and experience, if that makes sense. But like, if I look back to when I joined, and I remember they have this big annual event where they get everyone together at the O2, and I'm the investment director.
Scale of people there?
7,000 people.
Wow.
So if you don't like speaking in public, you're not going to like this. No. I mean, this is where rock stars and famous people play at the O2, right? So you walk out with 7,000 people and you're on stage, and for 20 minutes you've got to talk. I don't like talking with teleprompts, and again, they were freaking out.
I'm awful on script.
So people,
I'm dull.
But so everyone else is teleprompt, and I didn't, and I was like, okay, I want to do something different. So I was introducing the idea of financial well-being in a world worth living in. So they were nowhere on sort of ESG and climate change and net zero investing. And I was showing the story about being born in Holland, and so we got this massive, several tons of ice. It must have been 10, 15 meters high behind me. And it was melting as I was talking. And in front of me was a profile of sea level rise from Amsterdam to like New York and London. And the idea is by the time I would finish the talk, enough ice would have melted that Amsterdam would be underwater. So people still remember this talk now. Come on, people just remember the crazy guy with the melting ice. I also happened to do a double act with a guy who I have a big sort of man crush on. A guy, you probably know who he is, Lewis Pugh. So he'd just come back swim in the Arctic.
Yeah.
And so we did a bit of a double act together between my talk. But really I wanted to introduce this idea of kind of universal asset ownership, that, you know, helping someone have £1 million in retirement might feel like a good thing. But if there's no coral reefs, if we can't drink the water, if there are no bees, that's not a world worth living in. So this was me sort of presenting my vision. Anyway, that talk, it's funny. I would say you could split the feedback by age between people who were like, wow, that's the finest talk I've ever heard. That's amazing. Yeah. To who on earth is this guy? We just hired Greta Thunberg in disguise. And that was right. That wasn't a compliment, by the way. This is in sort of like 2019, 2020. But I introduced, so the sort of purpose or, you know, purpose statement of SJP is embrace your tomorrow. But if you look through on LinkedIn and see how many SJP financial advisors, there's 4,500, use some version of financial well-being in a world worth living in, that was introduced by me.
I love how that makes you proud still.
And, you know, SJP was the first wealth manager globally to sign up to GFANZ, which was the global financial alliance for net zero. And I got a lovely email from Mark Carney. Actually, I wish I kept it because it was still my SJP one. We're saying, oh, well done, Rob. What you're doing is the gold standard when it comes to kind of setting net zero strategy. But when you do that with £150 billion, that has real might. That, you know, it has real impact. And then, you know, even now after I've left, you know, a big part of SJP and anyone in the financial advice is you need to be recruiting more and younger advisors. And the amount of times I even now I get messaged on LinkedIn by partners saying, oh, you should just know, it's such a shame you left, but the reason I came to SJP was because of all the work that you did. So I definitely appealed to that sort of younger cohort. And, you know, I know the new CEO who's just started very much thinks that piece, sustainability, is something that they should be leading on, and they were nowhere in 5 years ago. So in that sense, I think I think I made a big difference. And even today, a year on, people talk about my team that I was responsible for as being the kind of like standout team within the company, both in terms of energy, in terms of diversity, in terms of thought leadership. And, you know, again, the guy who's leading that now, Tom Beale, my successor, is amazing and all the rest. But you kind of feel like you had a part in sort of putting that team together.
That's amazing. So the next chapter, natural capital.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, natural capital. The way I put it is that coming from the investment world, is I think nature is our most valuable asset, but we just don't value it. It is more valuable than all of the equities, all of the Amazon and Microsoft, all of the property and all of the bonds. And I suppose, and I know you've asked this question many times, so I just want to give a different answer to the one everyone always gives. Most of us are taught in our personal financial lives that our house is our kind of, it's the financial asset that certainly in the UK, you know, my home is my castle, that we want to invest in. But actually planet Earth is our home, is the home to 8 billion people. And the way we live our life, which you'd never do with your property. Normally when you buy a house and get out a mortgage, you do it up, right? You invest in it, you go down to the DIY store, you paint it, you invest in it, you make it better. Well, on planet Earth, we've been burning the rafters, we're just pulling off the tiles, we're destroying the house that we live in. And so our goal is really simple. The only way to help people realize that nature is our most valuable financial asset, i.e. the air we breathe, the water we drink, the bees that pollinate, everything that we eat, is if we start paying for nature. Because at the moment, the price of nature is zero, which is why we just rip it up like we don't care. And so I suppose I'm coming to the same problem that you and your team come at, but I'm really coming from the financial world, although with my geography, hydrology, glaciology background. And the way I describe it is that most of us use Netflix or Spotify and this kind of idea of freemium. But for the last 4 billion years, we've been on nature as a service on the freemium model, and we now need to start paying for nature. And we're going to make it an investable asset, because actually raising money from pension funds and making that argument is a relatively easy one, and I've heard you made it several times. But you can only make a financial return when someone starts to pay for it. And that is the most important thing. So, our original idea at Rebalance Earth a year ago, if you'd had us on, was around forest elephants as kind of basically keystone species. How can we take the ecosystem services that a keystone species represents? How can we tokenize it and then take those credits and then sell them back to companies? Tried for a year to sell it, Paul Revere style, and really struggled. But the feedback I kept getting over and over again, and it just happened to the people I know were all based in the UK, was actually, what can we do in the UK? And then I suppose this is where you go full circle, and I lent on what I know, which is rivers. So people don't realise that the flooding we're experiencing in the UK is as a result of climate change. Warmer temperature means more rainfall. But in the UK, only 10% of our rivers are in their natural state. So 90% of our rivers have been altered. And people will remember their GCSE geography when I start to talk about this, but you've got the hydraulic curve, and all the hydraulic curve says is, if I put in a certain amount of water, how quickly does that water move through the catchment, and what is the shape of that? And in COVID, we all remembered flattening the curve. Well, we've done the opposite. We've steepened the curve. So land use change in the UK, straightening our rivers, which we started doing in Victorian times and then did it on steroids in the 1950s post-World War II, means that water hits our catchment and flood risk goes through the roof. So if you can start to restore rivers at scale, we have restored rivers, but you'll see them, but it's like 2 kilometers or 500 meters. I know you've restored your stream here.
That'll be a big restoration project.
Yeah, I mean, to restore the Thames is a £16 billion opportunity. So people say, is there enough opportunity in the UK? I say, yeah, absolutely. Now, the cool thing about restoring a river is it helps with flood risk. It helps with drought risk. Actually, when you restore a river, you get what's called pools and riffles back, and you get insects back. Actually, riparian zones, which is the area around a river, when you straighten them, you strip them of wildlife, you get 30% back. Actually, we know that wetlands are one of the most highest value biodiversity net gain units. And then the second thing, this is like my business mind, is that when we're looking at a landscape, we're sort of using effectively like GIS models. So geographers will use these sort of layered map. Google Maps is basically GIS. You can zoom in and zoom out, and then you can put a restaurant on top or a tube station and go, how do I get from A to B? So we want to know where are our river catchments that are sort of degraded? Well, all of them. Where are they flashy? But where is their high value property? Or where, when you map back to a company and they do their sustainability report under TNFD, which is the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, do they have a big pain point? Because that we know that people really pay for either where they can make a lot of money or where there's going to be a lot of financial pain. So the River Irwell, that feeds into Manchester, that is a valuable area. So that is a good example. The River Tamar that feeds into Plymouth, again, a third of our cattle comes from that catchment area. Southwest Water need to spend a fortune on water storage. The Environment Agency spends a fortune on dredging. And so we're developing these sort of 25-year nature as a service agreements. And I noticed as we came down, there were a load of wind farms. What enabled renewable energy to take off is what's called power purchasing agreements. They're these kind of long-dated 25-year contracts between two people who say, well, if I provide you electricity, you'll pay me that. Well, we want to do the same, but for nature. And so, yeah, our goal is to pay our part in enabling the flow of private capital to protect and restore nature at scale here in the UK, and that's where our worlds meet, because we're highly aligned in trying to make that happen.
And it's so exciting. I remember when you first gave me a call and said, we're going to, this is going to be, I was so excited, because we need so many people trying to build the natural capital economy in so many different ways. And I think you and I have talked before about being aligned on the basis of it's not about growing our respective businesses, it's about growing that economy full stop, because there's so many people out there trying to damage the planet and not enough trying to fix it.
No, 100%. I mean, just specifically on this point more than ever, but even in, whether it was in Reddington or Malley Street, I always think competition's a good thing. Competition raises the bar for everyone. Hopefully you produce a better product or service for your clients. On this thing, the biggest competition is that we don't value nature. We need to, I mean, DEFRA wants £1 billion a year flowing into that. I mean, Finance Earth have said it's sort of like north of 50 billion pounds over the next 7 years to 2030. I actually think that number is bigger. I think it's probably more like 70 billion pounds. And I mean, you probably had the biggest impact over the last 2 years, but we haven't even started. And so actually, the more businesses like ours really holding the candle and winning the argument, both bottom up and top down, that actually this is not only the smart thing to do, but the only way if we're going to kind of survive on planet Earth, is exactly what we need to do. And human behavior is their safety in numbers, actually. So if people hear it enough times from multiple people, and it's not just us in this space, right, then actually people go, well, actually, they've probably got a point.
So that was one of the questions, actually. So wearing a couple of your old hats, we've got a huge amount of investment advisors out there that will be hearing. So pension funds, we hear all the time, I want to get into natural capital, I want to get into natural capital. Often because the people making the investment decisions, their kids and grandkids have said, you totally need to do this, you need to get in. But then you've got a group of investment advisors whose job it is to make sure people are careful and secure and not take risks. How do we upskill them enough so they're comfortable with taking that bet on the future?
To be fair, I think a lot of them are. I mean, over the last year, I probably, one of the things that surprised me was how many of my old competitors from the Reddington days wanted me to come in and talk to them and understand what I'm up to. I actually think on this subject, a lot of people want to learn about it. The $1 million question or the £1 million question is, if this pension fund invests £25 million or £100 million, how do I make money from nature? Yeah. So it's that connectivity, it's that duality of, okay, I can see that this is good for the environment, but show to me that this will make a financial return. Because the moment that we crack that, then it becomes a no-brainer. And, to put it in context, if you take all of the kind of pension fund and long-term saving assets in the UK, so defined benefit pension funds, defined contribution, which is going to be the future, local authority pension funds, private pensions, like the ones that, we used to manage at SJP, that's about £5 trillion in the UK. So a 2% allocation to natural capital, that gets you to £100 billion. And I think that's doable in the next, inside the next 10 years. So I don't think anyone's questioning the positive impact on nature. Obviously, the challenge is that this isn't a liquid asset, and you need, I say to BNG is a 30-year thing, right? So, let's not rush. Let's get it right, and hopefully beyond 30 years as well. But the real question is, when we can get the water companies, when we can get our food and beverage companies, when we do get Diageo and Nestle not investing a few £1 million in the projects that you kind of read about, but investing hundreds of millions of pounds, because they see this as core infrastructure for the long-term success and vitality of their businesses. Yeah. Once that happens, then people will start to see natural capital as a natural infrastructure asset, in the same way that we see pylons or roads as infrastructure assets. And to me, that's the tipping point, the point where a farmer goes, well, actually, if I'm making money from my land, whether I'm doing it to create biodiversity net gain or if I'm doing it to create food, at least for me economically, I should be indifferent to that point. And I don't think we've crossed that point. When we do, this market will tip.
And do you think the sort of more complex products, the derivatives of this world, are going to have a role to play in the natural capital economy?
I think derivatives just are part of a maturing financial market that grows. But I mean, people have talked about property derivatives, and that's not really ever taken off. But property is arguably the largest sort of asset class on this planet. So it potentially has a role. I think the more interesting role is normally, again, if you think about when you buy a house, you have your mortgage, which in my ward is that's your equity. You're taking a lot of risk, and then you borrow money, you get debt. And I think the interesting thing is when businesses like yours and mine are that equity layer to get things going, but then we can get the UK Infrastructure Bank, or we can get insurance companies to come in and provide debt. So instead of doing 100 million, we start doing 1 billion. Instead of doing 1 billion, we start to do 10 billion. That's the game changer. We need to 10x and 100x.
I'm so excited about the deal we did with Triodos to put together the first commercial debt package on conservation that was linked to carbon credits. And we're in a fortunate position where we didn't have to do that debt package. We could have bought land without it, but we wanted to show that was possible and to put that first stake in the ground, that this is something people can point to and work to. And we know others in this space who are now having conversations of their own, say, can we leverage what we're doing to achieve more? So I think you're absolutely right. In the years to come, we will see more of that.
And I 100% agree. We need exemplars, and that is a brilliant exemplar, because it's so much easier to kind of copy and improve what's already been done than when people can't see it. So the value of what you did with Triodos is priceless, because it shows people there's a way.
That's awesome. That's a useful point for me to say thank you to Phil and Simon and Bevis and Maverick out there for making that possible. So thank you. So you kindly commented on a piece I released at the start of 2024 about my 15 ideas and trends for we'd see natural capital in 2024. What are the key ones for you that you want to see or think we will see?
The one that I want to see is a sizable payment for a nature-related ecosystem service that isn't carbon.
Yeah.
That for me, and obviously this year, hopefully BNG goes live in February. If we start to see some real volume go through that'd be great. But I'd love to see, someone like a Tesco or an M&S or a Co-op do something quite innovative. Again, to kind of build on what you did with Triodos, and then somewhat specifically to my fund, I would love to do a river restoration at proper scale and show that we can not only unlock all of the value that I mentioned, but also that's a massive climate change flood mitigation, and go from the amazing work that all of our rivers trusts do. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the challenge of these trusts is that they're living hand to mouth. No one's ever come along and said, well, what if we had £25 million to restore a river?
Well, the only place we saw that was the Shad project on the River Severn in Worcester that resulted in 7 different, or more than that, fish passages that unlocked a huge section. And that was very specific engineered solution, not full restoration, and was still iconic in terms of what it was able to achieve. So the last project Dan and I, our head of environment, worked on before we left our previous company to come and start Oxygen Conservation, we restored 500 metres of Pendle water in the northwest, which had been in the 60s, the council literally blocked off the river, poured concrete down a gravel bed river so the sewerage outfall would go past it faster. So we literally took out concrete from the bed of the river, reinstalled the riffle pull sequences in the gravel bed of the channel. And at the time, it was the biggest restoration project that had been done there. So I love that you're going to pick up that baton and take it on, since we haven't got wet feet anymore. We're more on the hills. And what about you personally, Rob, for 2024? Is there anything on the bucket list that you're like, me and the family are definitely going to do this in 24?
Well, the bucket list was probably last year. I took my family to South Africa and safari, which was just mind-blowing. This year we're in 11+ mode, so I just need to be a good dad and help my daughter through her exams. That seems to be the priority. I think just enjoy. My biggest challenge is the downside of that work hard mentality is I could just go all in on Rebalance Earth.
Yeah.
And to make sure that I'm also a good husband and a good dad. That's a really important goal for me. So if I can do all of the things I want to do professionally and career-wise and do that, then that'll be an amazing 2024.
Amen to that. Rob, I've wanted to do this for years. Thank you so much for making the time to come and be part of the shoot room. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Rich, and best of luck to you and the team. And yeah, let's make this market happen.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.